It's the Locked On Flyers podcast for Wednesday, July 31st, your daily dose of Flyers news, analysis, and high quality content that's checking in with our prospects at the World Junior Summer Showcase.
Let's check it out.
Your Locked On Flyers, your daily podcast on the Philadelphia Flyers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, and thanks for making Locked On Flyers your first listen every day. I am Rachel Donner. You can find me on the app formerly known as Twitter at @rmiriam. I'm here as always with Russ Cohen, who's on all your favorite social media apps at Sportsology. We are at Locked On Flyers on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Twitter as well. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. You can find us over on YouTube or on the SiriusXM app or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Subscribe to get our latest episode as soon as it's available here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Russ, I've been trying to take a sneak peek at the results of our weekly poll, which is about the long-term contracts that the Flyers have in place. We did a whole show on that on Monday. So if you haven't listened to it, go back and do that. And then our weekly poll is which one of those long-term contracts do you think will work out the best for the Flyers? There'll be a link to that poll in the show notes, and it's over on YouTube. So check it out. Before we dig into the World Junior Summer Showcase, Matvei Michkov continues to make the rounds, and I think this is actually really good. Now, he did go to the Phillies game. The Phillies did not do well in this game, so we don't want to think about that. However, they did the whole presented him with a jersey. He threw out the first pitch, but I think most importantly, he was there with Joel Farabee and Cam York and Tyson Forster, which I think is a good thing. So it wasn't even like he was just there by himself. There were other players there with him. As like a social outing for them, which is really good to see.
Yeah, it was good. It was nice to see that. Actually, yeah, I did see some additional footage where Michkov gave Rob Thompson, the manager, a stick. Rob Thompson's from Sarnia, so he's a big hockey fan. So that's a big deal too. So that's something where you basically have a manager that's a little more into hockey than normally. And I think that's
he said
cool.
He played hockey or street hockey or something.
Oh, he's probably played more than that. I would guess he probably did more than that. So that's cool. And yeah, it was nice that he was with the guys. And so yeah, it was a nice outing.
Yeah, so hopefully they'll do more of that, and they're doing a lot more behind the scenes for him to get acclimated. In the meantime, some of the Flyers prospects that we saw at development camp have begun the World Junior Summer Showcase that we talked about. Now, interestingly, Team Canada, which has the most of the Flyers prospects on it at the moment, hasn't played a game yet. They played a split squat game last night that we haven't seen yet based on recording, but they're playing later in the tournament for real. So we'll get to them when we do the tournament wrap-up show later on. But starting off with Noah Powell, really interesting. He's been on the third line for USA Blue. Now, remember we said Team USA was split into a white squad and a blue squad. And so he's on the third line for the blue team with AJ Spalassi. Is that how you pronounce it?
I believe so.
Yeah, AJ Spalassi and Chris Pelosi, and who are both also NHL prospects that have been drafted. And they've also given him some time on the second power play unit for that team. And so far, he has an assist, which was a secondary assist on a Svoboda goal in the first period of a big 7-2 win over Sweden. But he seems to be, considering where he is in the pecking order, people are noticing him, which is good.
Yeah, he's getting noticed. Carl's a tough nut to crack, though. You're never going to be able to figure out what David Carl's thinking from the end of this camp. You're not. I was around him for 2 weeks. I couldn't figure out what he was thinking just for the last World Junior team. I just couldn't. So, but he does the right thing. He gives these guys a lot of opportunity because he has an idea 10 guys or more that are going to make this team before they even play. And then he was,
Right.
they want to see the rest. And so he's part of the rest. And the hard part for him is going to be they're going to ask him to play a certain role, but he's not going to play that role at Ohio State. So when they go see him at Ohio State, he's not going, they're going to need him to score at Ohio State. Like they're not like an offensively gifted team. So that's where it's going to be hard to figure that part out. So they'll look at it, they'll keep tabs on him. He's got a little bit of a shot, but I think that's the hard part is if he were like a super high offensive player, it'd be easier to check in on him and see how his offense is going. But now you're going to check and see how those other things are going, and he's not going to perform all those other things all the time for Ohio State because they'll have a different, coaching staff and the way they do things.
Yeah. One of the things that we haven't really focused too much on, but that is a factor for him is that he's actually hard of hearing. And
Yes.
he did an interview related to this showcase about that and what he does to, keep, focus and be able to understand what the coaches are saying. And um he does have hearing aids, but he also tries to keep face to face with the coaches, and the coaches know they have to be facing him when they're talking to him and stuff. And I think that it's, first of all, really cool that there's this kind of representation on the team, but also that the accommodations are being made for him, and he still
Yeah.
managed to play at such a high level.
Yeah, that part's amazing. I mean, when I was watching him at camp, I knew, and so I was watching how he does it, and it's hard. Like there have been players who are hard of hearing in other sports, and I've seen how they do it. And but let's be honest, if you're doing it, let's say for baseball, probably a little easier because it's a little slower. Although uh, the reason there was a guy named Dummy Hoy, and he actually played baseball, couldn't hear. And the reason that there's umpire signs in this era and the last 100 years is because of him, because he had to see how many balls there were, how many strikes there were. He couldn't hear it,
Right.
and so that started way back in the 1900s, right? And so for hockey, we're lucky in the sense that they're not going to have to change the rules for him to make accommodations. But and I do think coaches can do a lot of hand signaling. So, like I said, I watched him, and if you would have told me that I would tell you I would not be able to tell by the way he played on the ice or communicated on the ice.
Yeah, and the thing about him in this tournament in particular is that it has been noted that he's a scorer, right? He's a guy that is a playmaker too, and he likes to make things happen. But on this team, he's being asked to do something a little different and play more physical. He's being asked to block shots, and so that's like not his typical thing. But it's interesting because it's very similar what he might be asked to do on a Philadelphia Flyers team, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like this is a really good kind of experience for him because he is expanding his skills in a lot of ways.
Yes. I think for the future, it's good. I just hope he can work on some of these things in the season. That's the tricky part,
Right.
because otherwise it's going to be tough for them to make that determination.
Yeah. The other thing is that you mentioned David Carl is like really hard to read. So one thing, as of recording, we don't know yet what the combined Team USA squad is going to look like and if Noah Powell will be on it as of yet. However, what he has said is that they're going to let the vets rest because they know who those top 10 guys are, right? That you mentioned
Even,
early.
I mean, is he calling James Hagan's now a vet? He's like, he's been
Well,
the youngest guy for the last 2 years, but he is. He's the top liner with Perot and Leonard. But I just think
right.
it's funny that he's a vet because he's not even, it's his draft year.
Right.
It's, you know,
I know. But in terms of the guys that they basically know are going to be on the
yeah,
team, right? That they're going to rest and they're going to have the guys who they have questions about continue on in the tournament or, maybe are borderline and they want to see more from them. And that's a really good strategy to take in terms of how to use this tournament as it was intended, right? It's a summer
yeah.
showcase. It's not a tryout. I mean, it is a tryout, but it's not, it's not like a tune-up. It's a tryout
No, it's a tryout.
in
It's
that
good that
way.
he's playing because, like, Danny Nelson plays a similar game, but he's injured. But the coach knows what Danny Nelson can do. He's had him before,
Right.
So that's the other tricky part is going to be: would Powell have to replace a guy like that, or would he be on a different line doing that? Like that,
Mm.
they play
Yeah.
different positions, but essentially that kind of role.
Yeah, so I think this is a really good opportunity for Noah Powell. And again, because of that injury, he's getting more and different kind of ice time. And so I think it'll be really intriguing to see how he does in the rest of this tournament moving forward for Team USA, presuming he's going to be on the combined squad, right? You would
Right.
expect
Yeah, I'm sure he's gonna play in at least one of those games near the end. I don't know if he'll play in both. Like that's to be determined. But
that.
yeah,
Right.
Carl does. He's great with interviews. He's very forthcoming with things that you see on the ice, and he'll answer it. But ask him what he's going to do tomorrow. He's not telling you.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to talk about Jack Berglund and Heikki Ruohonen in this tournament so far coming up next. It's summer, which always makes me think of baseball. And with the Phillies being mostly fun, although they're a little dicey these days, I want to be there in person as much as possible. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting those tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With those killer last minute deals, the view from your seat, and a low price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying those coveted MLB tickets in your town, the summer concerts, and so much more. My favorite part of the app is that it's great for getting notified about last minute flash deals, and Game Time lets you save even more with zone deals where you pick a section and let Game Time choose the seat for you. Best of all, they have all in pricing, so there's no surprise fees at checkout, and your tickets are sent directly to your phone so you never have to dig through email. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code Locked On NHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem with the code Locked On NHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. We will get to your mailbag questions later on in today's show, but moving on to Jack Berglund on Team Sweden. Now, Sweden and Finland have just one squad. They don't have a split squad situation, so the competition is a little tighter. Ice time is a little bit
Oh yeah.
more in demand for both those squads. So Jack Berglund has been on the fourth line, centering that line with Lucas Pettersson and Simon Zather. And he was on the other side of that 7-2 game against USA Blue with Noah Powell on the USA side. But he did score one of those two goals for Team Sweden. Now, it was 7-0 in that game, and then Sweden scored those two goals late. It was the second goal. It was the last goal of the game that was scored. But it was a power play goal. And he looked really good net front doing it. I mean, first off, he's a giant. We know that. But I think like his positioning net front on the power play was really good.
Yeah, I mean, he's got pretty good strength now. It'll get better. He has good hands. So, none of that shocks me. I know those other two players well on the fourth line. So this isn't a fourth line situation where he's put out there with guys that can't move or score or anything. No,
Right.
Zether is a goal scorer. He's got a heck of a shot, and Pedersen can do a little bit of everything. So he's
Right.
on a talented line. So he should be able to produce with these guys.
Yeah, and because it is that combined squad and it's a team Sweden that, will eventually go on to the actual World Juniors tournament, they're always a top team in that tournament. So the competition is fierce to get on that team.
Oh yeah.
And so even playing on a fourth line
He's
on that
good.
team is really, really good. And I think that, he's getting his feet wet a little bit with this squad, but I think this tournament is a really good opportunity for him. And again, with those line mates and with that role, like getting the power play time, I think is really important. And working on the skills that he just, got to practice a little bit at Dev Camp, putting him into action in this tournament is really good. And I think he looked, decently solid out there.
Yeah, so far so good. I mean, it's good Yeah, Sweden's doing it a little differently. He's already part of the narrow group, so he's got a good chance.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to seeing what else he does. He will be playing against Team Canada and all those other Flyers prospects, or some of them, I guess. We'll see what that split squad looks like.
Right.
So we'll see, how that matchup looks. But that is what is on deck for Team Sweden today. On Team Finland, Heikki Ruohonen, man, I am so pissed on his behalf because they misspelled his name on a lineup sheet, and that's really annoying. They put a K instead of an H at the beginning of his first name, and I'm like, come on, that's
Mis-
not nice.
Mistakes happen. I know everybody there. I'm not saying a word.
He was also on the fourth line for Team Finland. Like I said, neither of these teams did a split squad. So just being on Team Finland is really good for him and really important to
Hmm.
gain that experience. He was on a line with Tom Leppa and Juna Saralainen, I believe
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
pronounced.
Sarah, those are two pretty good players. They're good players.
Yeah. Yeah, so he was able to get 2 assists in the game versus USA White, which Powell was not on. And both of those plays I thought were really different, but also good. So one of them was a shot on net that created a juicy rebound for his teammate to get the easy follow-up goal. And that's, when you're coming down the ice, kind of it was like
Hmm.
2-on-2-ish, 1.5, 2-on-1.5, I would say.
Hmm.
And to be able to create that kind of rebound for your teammate is an important thing to be able to do.
Yeah, no question. I mean, I saw that second goal a few times, and yeah, I'm impressed. I would say and this is where the summer showcase is a little off from what the real thing is. You can see the pace is not exactly what it's going
Right.
to be at for the World Juniors, but still, the stick, the stick handling and everything else, positioning. I like what I see. I don't know if he's making this team, but he's got a shot at least.
Right, and I think that second goal that you referred to is one of the kinds of things that he can do that's gonna give him
Yes.
the chance because, he is a really good forechecker, and that's exactly what he did on
Yep.
the second goal where he was digging in the corner on the forecheck, the puck squirts out to his teammate who then made a nice move and scored,
Yep.
right? And that's just the kind of thing you have to do is, like, grind out so that your teammate has these opportunities.
Yeah, you've got to, he's got to be a guy that's gonna dig in the corner. He's got to use his frame, and so all that's good. Those are all good signs. So yeah, I think people, like someone like Chris who couldn't be at Flyers Dev Camp is getting to see, what he looks like in this situation where we kind of saw at Dev Camp, like, hey, this guy looks really good. So
Yeah.
nice to see he's carrying it forward.
Yeah, and by Chris, you mean Chris Peters,
Chris
who's
Peters,
been
yeah,
reporting on the tournament. And yeah, he noticed those things and he called out Ruhonen as one of the highlights of that game and of the day at the summer showcase. And I think, he sees the hockey IQ
yeah,
that he has. And, we know like he's going to Harvard. He's a smart
yeah. We've
kid.
all questioned him on
So
that, on the Harvard thing and all that.
yeah, so I think the fact that other people are noticing that too a little bit more in this kind of environment post draft is not just sort of theoretical on a draft list. It's like, okay, in action against peers at a high level.
Hmm.
I think that's what is important to see here in terms of what's going on moving forward. Like I said, Canada played a split squad game last night. They are facing Sweden today, and then the combined team USA will be playing Finland as well. So I think those are going to be really fun games. First off, and second, I think we'll get to see some more Flyers prospect versus Flyers prospect action, which
Right.
is always fun to see
Yeah, yeah.
when your prospects go up against each other, and really what they can do. And I think I'm really looking forward to seeing USA again and seeing what Powell does in terms of this opportunity, and then just seeing, do they move Berglund or Ruohonen up in the lineup for these later games, or do they stick with these lines
I think
throughout
I
for
think those teams,
consistency?
yeah, I think those teams are going to stick with their lines. U.S. obviously, since they're not going to have their top line in there, maybe even their top two. Powell will play, probably a little better role, at least like getting some of that power play time and such. And then his goal is to play in the next game because that next one is
Yep.
going to be the one that's going to have exclusions, and he doesn't want to be one of the exclusions.
Exactly. So this tournament goes through Thursday.
Hmm.
So we will wrap it up probably next Monday on that show with all the details from all the games. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, y'all have some excellent mailbag questions and comments related to our recent shows. We are going to get to them coming up next. All right. So Flyers have had a pretty busy week prior to this
Oh yeah.
one, you would say, with Mitchkov coming over and the Travis Konecny deal. So y'all had some questions and comments related to especially the Travis Konecny deal. Most of the feedback on the deal in the comments was that it was too long because either his skill could decline and it wouldn't be worth it, or it was too long because his peak doesn't match up with a rebuild timing. And
Well, and
like,
that's the key
what do you
part, I
think
think.
about that?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think they've got it right because those are the two things that you would pick out of this, and I do think the timing part is the harder part here because unless they do peak early, he's getting older each year, and so I do think the listeners have it right on that.
Yeah, so there were two more detailed sort of thoughts about that. So Robert commented they should have traded him while he still had value. And
I think
I
they
don't
did for
know.
about a day. I don't think they tried very hard though.
Right.
I think they didn't really want to. I think they checked with Torts, and Torts probably said keep him as well. So I just feel like it wasn't a long thing. I get what he's saying because I think there was an opportunity to get a lot of value for him. Where now, if you trade him, let's say it's, I don't know, after the 6 years of a no move, and he's got 14 teams to choose from, and you trade him at the end of that, obviously you're not going to get
Mhm.
that much.
Right. And I think ultimately they just decided he had more value to the team
Right.
at that rate than trying to get return on an unknown entity or entities based on the kind of assets they got back. Like a player trade, you have a little bit more
Yeah.
information there, but especially if you were going to trade him for some pick assets, there's it's devil you know versus devil you don't know. And I think with Konechny, they made the decision to stick with him.
No, that's
So
fair.
the other interesting question that came up here from Tech Junkie 1815 on YouTube, they said this jokingly, but I think there's a question here in there, and that now they can try and trade him before the new deal kicks in, just like they tried to do with Sanheim. And I don't think they can do that, but I don't think they would stop taking calls on it, or at least put it out there, right?
Right. I mean, look, there could be a team out there now that there's cost certainty and you know what he's going to cost that could give you this amazing offer. It's likely not to happen. With Sanheim, it was a difference of different regimes and how they
Yeah.
viewed him, and not necessarily his play. I think Sanheim was a different situation. I'll just say it that way.
Yeah, well, and Konechny, of course, has like the no move clause in his contract,
Right.
so he would have to waive it for that, which I don't know that he would, but
No, he wouldn't.
but I do think,
But I
we
think
say
someone
it in
said before
jest.
it kicked in. I mean, that's yes, you could do it this
'Cause you
season
have a
before
whole year.
before it kicks in, sure, but that's not their plan, obviously.
No, I don't think so either. All right. So on Monday, we kind of looked at all the long term deals,
Yeah.
like I said earlier in the show. And Dave Harris says, I think Sealer becomes the Stahl or Johnson in his final 3 years. He's a little pricey for that role, but he will be able to teach the system. And I think that's a fair point.
No, that's fair. I think that's exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah, I just, they could have had a better quality player. Like Stahl and Johnson are not
No,
rock star players,
right.
in their current
At this
state. I mean,
point, right?
yeah,
Back in the day, they were great, but yeah.
right. Right. So I still think there's a question as to why that long a deal, but I do think that is what Nick Sealer will become, assuming he
Hmm.
sticks around for the full length of his deal. And then because of all of the long-term deals that the Flyers have and the kind of other mid-range contracts, uh, Chris Olivo asked, "Is this really a rebuild? I've been saying the Flyers brass are lying, that it's always been a retool. They're not tanking, so they're not going to stockpile top 5 draft picks. So, how do we acquire that top line talent? By having cap space and going all in on free agency. The problem is you won't have the cap room when you make signings like this." So, like, what do you say to that?
What I say to that is he's right in the sense that it's not a true rebuild. And and I'm not saying they had to dump a season or anything, but uh Danny could have done things to even make it a little harder to make the playoffs. And hey, if they make it, what can you do? But position themselves, even better than they are now, even though they're okay. They're well positioned for this draft. But for after this, it seems like they're not that worried about it because they feel like they're going to be better by the year after this. And it's a little soon. And that's why I don't think it's a true rebuild because of that. So yeah, I think they have been working with semantics here, but we see what they're doing and they're trying to speed it up. And it's a hard thing to do. I mean, again, if you don't think the Sabres wanted to speed it up, or the Detroit Red Wings, or any of these teams that are out of the playoffs almost double-digit years, it can get to be a very tricky situation. So I get
Yeah.
why fans would say that, and I agree that it's not a true rebuild in the sense that what we see.
Yeah, it is interesting because they finally said the word rebuild, and then it's not a true rebuild, to a large degree. And this is like a chicken and egg situation for me in terms of, is it not a true rebuild because of how good they did this past year, or because of Tortorella and the kind of team he wants to
It's all
ice?
of it. It's all of it.
Right. Or did they already have it in their head that it was still a retool? Or, it's like, which came first
I've
here?
always
And
felt from the very beginning, and I stay true to this, that they felt they could speed up the rebuild process, and I still feel like that's how they feel.
yeah, I think it is, especially with Mitchkov coming sooner. They've had to reconfigure as much as they've said they have a plan and they're sticking to it. You have to adjust. I mean, it's
Right.
only
Right.
natural,
Right.
given again that Mitchkov came over sooner. They've signed this deal with Konecny, and he's not going to be traded. To tear it completely down, because I think if they had wanted to tear it completely down, they would have traded Konecny.
Correct.
So it is interesting. We'll see what verbiage they use this upcoming season, as it progresses, and we'll see how the team does and how that
Right.
affects what kind of verbiage they're using.
Right.
But it's a really good point to be made for sure. Eddie comes in with another question related to all this. Thanks for the really great email, Eddie. By the way, always nice to hear good things and listener thoughts about how the team is doing. The question that he gets to is, have you started to look a couple of years out for players that might be available and match the team philosophy and be in the cost range? There's a million factors, like all the dead cap space. Will Torts still be here? But seems like we're not too bogged down because there's only those 4 contracts. Is there anyone or any specific type of player that we're looking for?
You have to really kind of see how far along Mitchkov is, because
Hmm.
if he is third line quality this year, then you're not rushing out to get him anybody next year, because he still has to turn into a second liner and eventually a first liner. So that's really the hardest part. Would I go out and, if nothing's clicking, get somebody who could play with him that maybe is Russian on offense? Yeah, I might. And but I don't have any thoughts about it as far as for NHL free agency. Uh, but I could tell you that we talked about Nemestikov as a possibility, in Guelph, to keep an eye
Hmm.
on him and see what he looks like, because if he's going to develop at maybe a similar rate or just behind a Michkov, that could be a future line mate. They could be looking at guys like that, some Russian prospects that are maybe just a little bit behind the curve that haven't been drafted. And that might be a good way to go, because I do think they're not in the market yet for a big free agent. And I don't think big free agents are, knocking down the door to come to Philly yet. They need to really see some play for a couple of years that says, hey, they're a cup team, before they're going to really do that.
Yeah, it is really interesting because if you're looking in 2 years, that's when all the big contracts are up, right?
Hmm.
So you look at who might be available that year. Now, some of these guys might sign extensions before their contracts are up. So
Right.
you never know who's actually going to be available. But interestingly, 2 Russians, Artemi Panarin and Kirill Kaprizov, who would complement on the other wing for Michkov, their contracts are going to be up in 2 years. Now, obviously, like anything can happen, and I'm not saying the Flyers could or should go after these guys. They are very expensive, both of
Yes,
them.
that's going to be the
Current,
problem.
yeah. So
I would stay
it's
away
like,
from both because
yeah,
of the expense part, because I don't know what Panarin's going to do, because he likes playing with the Rangers, so there's a chance he resigns. But I think Kaprizov, I think he's going UFA, and you're talking
yeah,
about a 10 million or more. You're talking about probably an $11 million player. I don't think
yeah.
that's the move that they should do, even at that point.
No, and you would assume that by then, whoever they're drafting next year will have a year more of knowledge about them. And if the
Yeah.
Flyers really have high quality draft picks next year, we'll know more about them. The environment of what they'll need is going to be a little bit different as well. So it's just, you got to throw it out there because the names are there and the
Oh
timing
yeah,
is
sure. I mean,
as I mean, Connor McDavid's up that year too, but
no offense to Philly. Philly's not first on Connor
no.
McDavid's list.
No,
We know that.
I mean, yeah, stranger things have happened. The chances are not 0, but the chances are not probably 1%
Right.
either.
That's
So,
fair.
like, um,
I think the odds are right on what you're saying.
yeah, but it's a really good question to ask
It is.
because given
I think
everything,
I
I
think
think
it
it's
has to be asked every year,
yeah,
and I think
yeah,
you have to assess this team every year, because again, look, we're getting close to the end of the John Tortorella era too, unless they extend him, which I don't think they're going to extend him as a coach. So that's going to change things too, right? So that's going to be the other part of this, unless they give him, an extension. Next year he'll be a lame duck coach if they don't give him an extension, unless they tell
mhm.
you what their future plan is for John, like, hey, we're going to bump him upstairs and he's going to do this, or they don't tell you anything. And so, like, that's another important part of this.
It really is. All right, to be continued. We will talk more about it as next season progresses and we see how Mitchkov is doing. We will be back on Friday with your poll results on those long term deals, as well as a little more insight into the KHL goalie situation going on with the Flyers prospects. As a reminder, we always want to hear from you. So you can send in those mailbag questions on Twitter at Locked On Flyers. You can email us at lockedonflyers@gmail or comment over on YouTube. I'm Rachel. I'm on Twitter at rmiriam. That's RMIRIAM.
I'm Russ. I'm at Sportsology, SPORTSOLLGY.
Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube that's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Have a great day.